Hi everyone, sorry for not being able to do reviews as normal. I've been really busy with school, but today I have some free time, and so I'm going to do a review on the JDS Labs C5D. And so how does this differ from the C5? Well, the D stands for the DAC, and so the C5D is actually just a regular C5, which is right here, and instead it has a DAC as well as an amp. So actually, just like the C5, you can open up the C5D by unscrewing the front panel screws or the rear panel. And just slide out the circuit board. And just like that, you have the C5D's internals. And so if you can't tell, the whole circuit is basically the same thing like the C5. On the other hand, underneath the battery reveals the DAC components, and I actually have a macro lens with me, so I will show you guys the close-up version of the C5D. Okay, so looking at the internals of the C5D, there are a lot of cool components that are similar to the C5. You've got the regular good old potentiometer that's digitally controlled, and just like the C5, you can reprogram it, which is really nice. I will have 5 modes of operation for the C5D, and I will go through them later in the video. But I just want to give you guys an overview of what the C5D's internals look like. So getting back to the review, as stated, the C5D is basically like the C5. So in terms of how they sound, the C5's amp section matches that of the C5D. So they both share a very similar sound, and if you remember my C5 video, I was comparing the C5 with the Objective 2 headphone amplifier, and they were pretty close in terms of the overall sound signature. The C5D, just like the C5, carries a kind of a more warmish sound signature. The mid-range is brought forward a little bit, so it's a little more engaging. And the soundstage is more rounded in that there's a little more layering and the depth, but the soundstage width is not as wide as the Objective 2. So instruments won't pan as wide in your head, but they have some more depth, which is nice. So it's an overall more rounded soundstage. But overall, I really like the C5 for the amp section, so I enjoy the same kind of sound for the C5D. Now in terms of the DAC section, a lot of people were wondering how the C5D's DAC compares to that of the Objective DAC, which is also a really great sounding DAC for the price that you pay for. And so comparing them side by side, I've been using the Theo headphone switcher, and I found that in terms of the DAC sound, the C5D has a more kind of warm sound compared to the ODAC. And so basically it's like more of a euphoric kind of lush sound, whereas the objective DAC is more of a more technical sound where you can analyze the instruments more. But I found that the C5D worked better with a lot more headphones. So I've actually tried the C5D with the Hi-Fi Man HE4, which is a very inefficient headphone, but I found that the C5D actually drove it pretty well for a portable setup. I've also used the C5D with the Mr. Speaker's Alpha Dog, and I really enjoyed the combo out of the C5D more than the Objective 2 and the Objective DAC, which was surprising to me. But I think it's because the C5D had that more euphoric kind of warm sound to it. So overall, I enjoy the C5D for a DAC as well as an amp. So I use this on the go as my portable go-to headphone, basically sound card with my laptop when I bring it to school. And I've really enjoyed the sound that this provides, especially as a portable unit. I was kind of surprised at how well it stacked against the Objective DAC and Objective 2. So it held its own ground, which is great. So apart from the sound, which I think is fantastic, the build quality is basically the same thing as a C5. So on the front panel here, we've got the source. Come on, focus. There we go. You've got the source input, the headphone output, a bass boost switch, power light, and the digital potentiometer. So the bass boost switch is a little different from my version of the C5. So there's 3 levels of bass boost. Right here on the bottom is the medium bass boost. In the middle there, you've got the highest bass boost. And then at the top there, you've got no bass boost. So my version of the C5, which is right here, only has 2 levels of the bass boost. Focus. So on the high switch, you've got no bass boost. Then on the bottom, you've got maximum bass boost. So JDS Labs actually listened to the customers. A lot of the customers said that the bass boost on the C5 was a little bit too much, so they incorporated the 3-way switch into the C5D, and now their current model of the C5 also has a 3-way bass boost switch, which is really nice. So in addition, on the back of the C5D, let's see if we can get this to focus, you've got the standard USB input, which is how you charge the C5D, and also how you use the C5D as a USB DAC. And then you've got the power switch over here. And then what's different from the C5 is that you also have a battery mode and a charging mode switch over here. So when you plug this into your computer, you can have it run on battery or charge it. So most people put it on the charge mode there. And on battery mode, the DAC is self-powered such that you can use it with any iOS device that uses iOS 7 or Android devices that support USB on the go. So with an iOS device, it needs to have iOS 7 because iOS 7 can finally support digital output. So basically what you need is the camera connection, Apple camera connection kit, which you can buy for about 30 bucks. This is the 30-pin variant. So this plugs into my iPhone. Then at the bottom, you have a standard USB 2.0 port. So you go ahead and plug a standard USB into there. And then at the other end, you have a USB mini, and that plugs right into the C5D. So you plug that just like that in the C5D, and you should be able to use this with your iPhone or other iOS device that uses iOS 7, and you can use the C5D as an external DAC. So that's a really cool feature of the C5D, to have a self-powered DAC like that. For Android, it's a bit easier. All you need is a standard USB on-the-go cable. So JDS Labs actually sells such a cable, and it's just a short USB mini to USB micro, so you can plug this into your Android device. Very easy to set up. And again, you can use that as an external DAC with your Android device. So that's really nice that the JDS Labs C5D was designed to have the DAC self-powered, such that you can use the DAC with other devices. Now, speaking of the DAC, one thing that I don't like about the C5D is the DAC is actually limited, and so the DAC that's on board on the C5D can actually play 32-bit 384 kilohertz sampling rate audio, as well as DSD. However, to make the C5D more compatible with more devices without using external drivers, they reduced that capability such that it can only play 24-bit 96 kilohertz music. So overall, that shouldn't really impact a lot of people, and it doesn't really affect my impressions of the C5D as a whole, but it's just something to keep in mind. I'd asked John Sieber of JDS Labs to see if you can kind of reverse that and make it so that it can play the 32-bit 384 kilohertz or DSD files, and he said that no, basically you can't, because it's proprietary software to enable that, and so users can't do it, but maybe upon the request of the customer, JDS Labs will be able to basically unlock that for you, but I kind of doubt that because they have to build their own drivers. So that's one thing to keep in mind with the C5D. Another cool thing about the charge versus battery mode here, now that I remembered about it, is that when you put it connected to an Android device or an iOS device with the Apple Camera Connection Kit, you can actually put it on charge mode, and that will charge the C5D. So that's actually a really cool feature, except it kind of eats up your phone's battery life instead of the C5D. And speaking of the battery life, the C5D's battery life is a little bit shorter than the C5. So the C5 got around 10-11 hours of battery life with just music. The C5D, on the other hand, only gets around 8 to 9 hours with only the amp section running, and then about 6 hours when using it as a external DAC without charging it. So that's kind of a bummer on the C5D, but one way to improve the battery life actually is to reprogram it. And so when you reprogram it, you can turn the DAC components to be low power. So in the Arduino code, the DAC is always on the standard configuration, but if you change the code, you can set it so that it can be low instead of high. So that basically means that DAC won't be detected by other devices, but it still has some power going through the circuits. So what I did with the C5D to modify it is that when you first turn it on, the volume is at level 1, so I won't be blasting my ears when I turn on the C5D. The stock configuration remembers the gain as well as the volume level that you set it at. So if you left it at high gain, 20 out of 63 volume, you're going to be blasting your ears. So it's nice about the C5D, so I reprogrammed it so that it's at low gain, level 1 volume. Then when you press the gain switch, it has a blinking LED, and that indicates that it's on mode number 2. And I changed it so that it's at high gain. Now in the first and the second modes, I turned the DAC on the low setting, so it won't be detected on your computer as a DAC. And then when I press the gain button again, the LED blinks a little bit faster, and now this is when the DAC part turns on. So I turned the DAC part on, I turned the gain back to low, and the volume back to level 1. So this is now what the standard C5D is like. The DAC is always on. When I press the gain switch again, the LED blinks a little bit faster, and now the gain is at high, still in the DAC mode. Now what's special about the C5Ds DAC section is that it has a digital filter implemented such that you can change the filter. So there's two types of filters that the C5D can have. One's called the minimum phase filter, which is what the default one is, and that eliminates pre-ringing in your music. So when you play music, it actually sends a signal, and there's a little bit of ringing before the signal actually gets processed, and then some ringing after the signal gets processed. And that's to get a sharp cutoff filter in the digital domain, or sorry, in the frequency domain, which happens to be digital. Now that has some problems in that the pre-ringing doesn't occur naturally, and so the minimum phase filter eliminates that, but it increases the amount of post-ringing. So on standard, the pre-ringing filter is enabled, and the when you turn that setting off, you can bring back the pre-ringing back to most normal DACs. So on this next setting, the LED is blinking even faster, but now, and this is still on high gain, but now you can actually change the filter. So I have it set so that if you switch the volume to the right, it turns the minimum phase filter, or the eliminated pre-ringing filter, on. And when I switch it to the left, it brings back the normal everyday DAC filter, which is also called a brick wall filter because it basically cuts off the frequency response at 22.5 kilohertz sharp. So that's a cool thing about the C5D, in that you can reprogram it to how you want the filter, how you want the gains, how you want the LED and the volume itself to behave. And so when I press the gain switch again, I still have the DAC enabled, and it goes back to low gain. So you can basically cycle between low, high DAC filter and back to low modes when you have this mode configured the way that I do. So that's my review for the C5D. Sorry it's a bit long, like most of my other videos actually. So thank you for watching. If you have any questions, or if you need some assistance with the programming on the C5D, you are more than welcome to leave a comment. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for my next video, which will be either later today or next week, depending on when I get time. It will be my review of the stacks setup that I have. Alright, thank you, and I'll see you guys soon.